All right, this is the basics of Blender. So first thing I'm going to do when I open up a new file is I can just delete these defaults. It'll have a cube, a camera, and a light by default. I can just select those and hit X to delete them. Then let's pull in a 3D model that we want to work with in here. So to do that, you're just going to go up to File, look for Import, and you just need to select the format of model that you want to import. So you could do an STL or an OBJ depending on what it is that you have. So I'm just going to come in here and find a model that I might want to work with. Okay, so I found this pigeon model. First thing I did, I scrolled out because it looks like it brought it in at the wrong size. It is giant. So we want to scale this down. So what I can do is hit S on my keyboard for scale. There are three main ones you're going to be using here: scale, grab, and rotate. S, G, and R on the keyboard. So I've hit S and then move my mouse. It's going to scale it up or down. So I'm going to scale this down a little bit. Then I want to put it right here at the origin. So I'm going to hit G for grab. I can move it over here. And if I wanted to, I could hit R for rotate and rotate it. For each of those, you can also lock it to a specific axis. So if I wanted to make it just shorter, I would hit S for scale, and then I would hit Z on my keyboard for the Z axis, and then it would only scale in the Z dimension. Do the same thing if I did X instead, or Y. And if you hit Shift and one of those buttons, then it scales it in the other two dimensions, but not the one that you hit Shift with. So I'm gonna now try rotating, same thing. I could hit rotate, hit Z for the Z dimension, and now it just rotates it around the Z axis. Or if I did X or Y. Same thing for grabbing, G for grab. I want to move it on the X axis, Y axis, or Z axis. Okay, so let's take a look at the mesh. First, I'm going to hit Shift Z on the keyboard. That takes me into wireframe mode. So that will show straight through the mesh. You can see this is a super dense mesh, even though it looks kind of low poly. So if I hit also Tab, that'll take me into edit mode, where I can, instead of seeing the object as a whole, I can edit individual vertices like this. So this mesh is really dense, and we want to clean that up so it'll run a little bit smoother. So we're going to try using a modifier to reduce the mesh. To do that, first I'm going to want to click on my model and come over here to the right menu. I'm looking for the blue wrench. That's the modifiers panel. I'm going to click on modifiers, come in here and hit add modifier. And we're going to be looking in the generate menu. That's going to be most of the modifiers you're going to be working with. And for this case, we want to decimate our modifier. So these are all in alphabetical order. So decimate should be right here. Decimate is going to reduce our mesh to a more compact mesh instead of all these tiny faces. So there are three types of decimate here: collapse, unsubdivide, and planar. Let's try collapse first. So collapse, you put in the ratio of faces that you want. So this is what we have right now. Let's say I wanted to be a tenth as many faces. I would hit 0.1 and hit enter. Probably take a second to load, especially depending on how dense your mesh is, because it just needs to recalculate everything. All right. So that looks a little better now. That's a lot less dense, but the model still looks just as good. If I come here and make any changes, it'll then take a minute to load again and then update it. But let's say I actually was happy with this and I want this to be my new mesh instead of this super dense one, because if I go into edit mode, it's still using the super dense mesh. This modifier is just changing after that step. So let's go back into object mode by hitting tab. And let's say I want this reduced mesh to be my new mesh I'm working with. What I'm going to do is apply the modifier. So there's two ways to do this. First way is you're going to right click on your object and you're going to look for convert to mesh. And that's just going to apply anything else that's happening and convert it to just a straight mesh. The other option is to look over here in the modifier. I'm going to find my modifier, hit this drop down, and hit apply. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this. Okay, after that's finished loading, you'll see it's actually running quite a bit smoother now because instead of that super dense mesh, it is now a less dense mesh, but still pretty dense. So now this will be a bit easier to work with and it looks about the same, so that's great. Let's say we wanted to reduce it even further and flatten some of these flat faces into a single face. I'm going to go back in and use the same modifier as before. Add modifier, generate, decimate. This time I'm going to try planar. So what planar is going to do is you set an angle limit and it will combine any faces that are within that limit. So right here you can see all of these faces were aligned with each other. They were pretty flat. And so it's just simply combining those into a single flat face, which again reduces our poly count a lot and makes it easier to work with our mesh. I can change the angle it's doing that within. So let's say I did 3 degrees instead. Then we'll still keep a little more detail, but it'll still flatten out these faces. Or if I did something like 13 degrees, then it's going to reduce it even more. Okay, so now this is the mesh I'm looking at, and it's a lot simpler. But again, if I click on it and hit tab, you see it still has all that density. So I'm once again going to apply this modifier. So this time I'm going to go in here, right click, convert to mesh. Okay, now if I hit tab, look at my model, look at that. It is super simple now, which means it would be really quick to edit and is a much smaller file size as well. Okay, so let's say now I wanted to actually round this over a little bit more and remesh this. We're going to try using a remesh modifier, which is super helpful if your mesh is not whole, if there are mistakes, things overlap, or if the mesh is just a mess, then you can do a remesh. So I'm going to hit add modifier, generate, and I'm looking for a remesh here. So I'm going to apply a remesh, and you can see if I look closer now, it's made up a bunch of these little hexagons and triangles. And it's kind of been smoothed over on the corners a little bit. So that's going to up our poly count again a lot. I can come over here and look in the modifier. It's set to voxel, which is the most standard mode. Voxel is basically taking your object and dumping a bunch of beans in it, and then taking the shape of the beans as your new mesh. So your voxel size is the size of the beans. It is set to 0.1 by default. Let's go a little bit bigger than that. Let's say I did 1. Then you can see the voxels are much bigger. I can also come here to adaptivity and up this a little bit. What that does is it will add more detail where it's needed, but reduce it where it's not. So that's super nice to keep a nice, simple, clean mesh. So that does kind of smooth over my mesh. Let's reduce this a little more. Let's say I did 10. That leaves me with a super low poly mesh. Let's try maybe 5. Where I start to lose some details. So you have to kind of mess with this to get it dialed in how you would like. And so you have all the details you want. Other methods for remesh, blocks, basically makes it into Legos or Minecraft blocks, and you just increase this depth to split it into smaller blocks. Smooth is going to try to smooth things over. 5, 6. So I can keep increasing this. You don't want to go too dense or it's going to crash the computer. But that's nice for making a nice smooth mesh if it's like a model of a person or something like that. Sharp is going to try to retain sharp edges. So basically combining these, I could come in here, smooth it over a little bit if I wanted a more smooth mesh. And then if I wanted to reduce the poly count again, I could come in here and add a modifier, generate, and decimate like before. And I'm going to reduce this to 0.1. And I can basically go and mess with this if I wanted like a super low poly. So over here, the modifiers will operate in the order they are listed. So right now I have a remesh, then a decimate, so it's going to do them in that order. If I were to drag this and switch the order, it would take a couple minutes to recalculate, and then it would first decimate my mesh, then it would remesh it. So let's say I was happy with this for whatever reason. I could, actually, let me show you one more first. Let's add a subdivision surface modifier. Subdivision surface is great for making having a simple mesh that you're editing, but having a more smooth, polished final object. So I'm going to add a modifier, generate, and subdivision surface. So subdivision surface, as you can see, just smoothed that over. So just 0.05. There we go. So if I can use this to toggle it off so you can see what this is actually doing. This is our mesh before. And then subdivision surface is coming in and rounding off the edges. It's basically taking every one of these faces and splitting it into a couple other faces and cutting out any sharp corners. So that leaves me kind of with a more natural, organic looking pigeon. And if I up the levels here, basically that's just going to do another split where it's going to take every one of those faces and split it again. So you can keep doing this to make it a really smooth mesh, but if you do it too much, it will crash your computer. Mostly we'll want to use Catmull-Clark. That's the one where it's smoothing it over. If you do simple, then that's not really doing much because it is, if I show you here, I'd say I add a cube. If I add a subdivision surface, it's doing that, rounding it over. And if I do a simple, and apply it, you can see it's just splitting it into more slices. Okay, so I now have my pigeon that I've remeshed, I've decimated, and I have subdivided. Last thing I want to show you is a Boolean. Let's say I wanted to cut it and make it into a little pencil holder or something. I could add another object. So I'm going to add mesh. Let's add a cylinder. I'm going to move it and scale it like we did before. S for scale. I'm going to hit S and Z to scale it in the Z direction. I'm going to hit G for grab. I want to grab it in the Y direction, so I hit Y. Then in the Z direction, grab Z. And I'm basically just going to rotate it and align it how I want with a combination of grabbing, scaling, and rotating. Okay, let's say I was happy with this and I want this to cut into my model. I can come back to my pigeon. I'm going to hit add modifier, generate, Boolean. So Boolean, we have three options: difference, union, and intersect. Let's start with difference. So first I need to select the object that is going to be the cutting tool. I can just hit this eyedropper and click on my cylinder. And now it is cutting in. So if I come up here and hide my cylinder, you can see we now have the cylinder cutting into the back of the pigeon. If I switch it to union, it then will combine them into a single object. And if I switch to intersect, it will only take the area where they're overlapping. So I'm going to keep that on difference for now, and that's looking good. But let's say I wanted these corners to also be more rounded. So right now what we're doing is we remesh, we reduce it with the decimate, we are adding more complexity with subdivision, and then we're cutting it with the Boolean. If I switch the order of these, then it's going to round these corners off a little bit. So let's say I was happy with my model now and I want to export it for 3D printing. What I can do, I can either right click, convert to mesh to get it all prepped, or I can also do that as I'm exporting. So probably the best way to do this, click on your model, whatever it is you want to export. I'm going to hit File, Export, and choose the format. For 3D printing, you'll use STL. If you are doing cutting with the paper cutting program, then you would probably want an OBJ. So we're going to do an STL for now. I'm going to click there. I can give it a name. I'm going to select selection only, which will only use the object that I currently had selected. And I want to make sure I have selected apply modifiers. If I don't do that, it's just going to take that base mesh we had before. If I do turn that on, it's going to go and apply each of these modifiers in order before it exports. So I'm just going to save this to my downloads. And let's hide this. I'm just going to hit H to hide it and bring it back over here. Let's pull in that mesh and see how it's looking. Okay, so I've got my model here. I'm going to move it in, check it out. And because of all the subdivisions, you can see it's a really dense mesh again. Oh, actually, no, sorry. This is the original object. I'm going to go import STL, and I'm looking for bird. That's better. So now we have our bird model with the hole in its back. If you ever bring it in and it looks kind of weird like this, that may mean it's shading. It's trying to make it look nice and smooth. We're going to right click on this and switch this to shade auto smooth, and that'll fix those problems. So now you can see here's our mesh. And make sure you save your files.